All right, welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back
to our final episode.
Our final episode.
You made it.
Of the series of the Hafu season 1. If you've made it this far,
congratulations.
Thank you. Literally, thank you so much for bearing with us. We've recorded all of these episodes in one day, so it's a lot of chatter. It's a lot of deep information. So
yeah, a lot of emotions.
Yeah, lots of emotions. So we're glad that at least if you have made it this far, you've been able to space it out.
Yes.
Over a couple weeks.
Oh my God.
For yourself.
For your mental health.
For your mental health. For our mental health. Brilliant. So episode 1, we talked a bit about our Issei, and what generations we're from. In episode 2, we talked about our homemade pilgrimage. So definitely lots of homemade solutions to finding information on our family. So if you haven't listened to that episode, there will be a link down below or in our YouTube, or hopefully there will be something on the screen at the end of this episode. Episode 3, we were talking about what it means now to us to be Japanese Canadian, kind of some traditions that have been passed down to us overall. And episode 4 kind of leads us to the conclusion of all the information that we can possibly give you, which is the final lesson that we hope to pass on, the final discussion we wish to have, which is how to stay connected to our roots.
Mm-hmm. And how the next generations are going to stay connected to their roots.
Yes, which is part of that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So one of the major points that I think we came up with here was honoring family traditions, which we've talked a little bit about already in a couple episodes. But what does that mean, honoring family traditions? For me, that kind of means remembering important traditions that were important to our elders. So even though, for example, attending different events in our community wasn't passed down to me, it is evident to me that it was important to my grandparents,
right?
Because they had attempted to pass it down, and then it just was lost after that. So being able to be involved in the community is a huge way to stay connected to your roots. I fully intend to stay connected to the Japanese Canadian community for however long, even if we end up in Japan.
Yeah.
Probably even especially when we're in Japan.
Totally.
It'll be an interesting contrast of how to celebrate culture. And maybe even be able to help pass on pieces of information from Japan into the community. The community is just always self-feeding for different cultural practices and celebrations. And also just ensuring that those traditions for you are passed down. So I have a little sister, a little sister who's also Hafu. She's 3 years old, and I've already, my parents have laughed at me. I've already bought her a bunch of Jeff Chiba's books. I've bought her a couple of other books on being Hafu and being mixed, to help her kind of form an early idea on her identity. And I fully expect to be the Japanese auntie for her growing up. And being able to pass down all that stuff, even things like passing down, calling rice crackers senbei. I've tried to kind of instill in her because her mother is white, so she calls it, Maya, do you want rice crackers? And I'm always like, senbei.
Do you mean
you want senbei?
Oh my God.
And she's always like, yeah. So we're almost there with that, but we'll eventually pass on the soba noodle tradition. We'll eventually pass on, now that we know what my family kemon is. Now that I know what the family kemon is and I have it tattooed on my arm, it'll just, it'll be natural for her to ask about it, and I'll get the opportunity to explain it in full detail, as you've all had the displeasure of hearing my voice go on and on and on for about an hour.
Yeah, well, speaking of Japanese aunt, I am a Japanese aunt.
Yes,
I'm an auntie. I have yet to meet my nieces because they live in a different part of Canada, and unfortunately when the youngest was born, it was a year before the pandemic started, and within that first year I just didn't get a chance to get to them, and then obviously things hit the fan, so travel wasn't really going to happen. So hopefully I'll get a chance to meet my two nieces soon, because I am going to be so aggressive about Japanese. Like, I'm just gonna force Japanese culture onto them, like whether they want it or not. Yeah, you know, like everything that I wish I heard when I was a kid and things that I wish that I had when I was a kid, I'm gonna make sure that they have. Yeah. And they're 4th generation now.
Right.
So they're both two little beautiful Hapa babies.
Yeah, and my sister is Gosei, so she's the 5th generation.
Oh, she's in there.
Integral part of passing down information.
It's so funny. The second I saw her, I was like, oh my God, she looks so Japanese.
Like my sister?
Your sister? Yeah, like both like you and her. Like, you guys got the genes like strong, mama.
She
got them
Japanese
genes. Eyebrows.
Girl,
like,
here we go. Oh yeah, those Japanese eyebrows.
Japanese eyebrows, we all know.
We all know the struggle.
Yeah, she's going to be beautiful. She's going to be beautiful when she's older.
Yeah. I can't wait for her to start asking questions like that. I've already started like really funny conversations with her about her identity, which you can listen to in our White 2 episode on our podcast.
Gorgeous.
I think that's the episode that we talked about it. But anyway, it was a post-Christmas episode on being mixed.
Yeah.
So preserving stories I think is super important too, with being able to stay connected to our roots as we get older.
Yeah.
So like documenting and organizing the info that we managed to obtain.
Yeah.
So like all of the information that I found on your family for this,
I'll be able to
I'll make sure that you have it physically so that you can find a way. I have so much documentation, both like physical and digital, and I'm trying to come up with like
a way to
the most effective, way to
categorize it all.
To categorize it all, and then like I want to be able to cross-reference that with photographs. So I don't know about you guys, but like our families took so many pictures.
Nice.
In their early lives. So we have like boxes and boxes and boxes of photos.
Gorgeous.
With family members that none of us know who they are anymore. But I obviously now I know who a lot of them are. So it would be, I don't know, I've thought about categorizing based on like family members.
Okay.
Based on maybe like as like a subcategory, but like the major category being by like generation. Right. I don't know.
Yeah.
If you have any tips on trying to categorize all of that information, definitely let me know. It gives me a headache thinking about it. But eventually I do want to be able to have it all like archived well and in a way that makes sense, so that when I am passing on that information to like my baby sister or my kids in the future, that it'll be a lot easier for them to sift through, and that it'll all kind of make sense. You won't have to work backwards from scratch to find all of that information.
Yeah.
It'll just be documented well.
Definitely.
I also have learning how to use Nikkei resources, which is really important when you're doing like research and such. So like being careful with the sources that you are using for your research. We kind of touched upon in episode 2 of the series, but using the Nikkei sources are going to ultimately be like your best friend. So thankfully now we have the Landscapes of Injustice archive that's public. The Japan Foundation released their archive very recently too. The Nikkei Center has had their archive, and they add stuff to it every single day for their collection of information. Actually, on the Nikkei Center's website archive, I was able to find the graduation photo of my Opa-san from VJLS,
from this very school.
In this building right here. And the reunion photo that her graduation class took for those who had ended up in Ontario. So it was funny to kind of see. I've seen so many pictures of my Oba-san at that age now that I just like, I saw the picture and I was like, oh, there she is. It's that one.
She is.
It's the one who doesn't want her picture taken, obviously. It's the only one. She's the only one in the picture who's just standing there going, oh. And then same thing with like the reunion photo. That's just who she is. So yeah, learn how to use those resources. They're not super difficult, but you have to be pretty persistent about search terms and understanding that terms or names might have been misspelled, as we've already experienced with Sakura's grandmother. So trying different ways to spell both the first name and last name of family members that you're looking for information on, and remembering to look for maiden names as well as the names that they've been married into, because especially if you don't know the timeline of their marriage, because things are always documented under there. I know that I've had to like reopen my Ancestry app like a million times when I was doing research for your family,
right?
To remind myself to look up each of the like last names accompanied with the first names and different spellings, etc. It's a lot to keep track of, so it's good to just to stay organized when you're using those resources, and make sure that you have a detailed list formed. I also have signing up for newsletters for calls and info. For calls for info. There we go. Yeah. We love my scribbly writing on my cue cards here. Super important. I've actually recently signed up for the newsletter for VJLS. I keep up with the bulletin every now and then. I've actually had something posted in the bulletin about me. Surprise, surprise. Yeah, for my documentary that was released in 2015. But this article was posted in like 2018 to advertise the fact that the film had been streaming on Yahoo Japan. So I'm very familiar with the bulletin and John Greenaway. Or I know who he is. We don't know each other. But yeah, it's good just to stay informed on different community events. So it's good to just sign up for those newsletters, especially if you're looking for signing up for your Koseki and stuff like that. Definitely hit up rootstech.org, which is, I believe, actually run through Ancestry, but I can verify that the main prof that teaches the Koseki specific lesson, Martinus Wolf, is not full of shit. He knows what he's talking about. Gorgeous. And he's really incredible. All of the resources that he provides for absolutely for free. So you may as well sign up for stuff like that. Yeah, stay connected. Stay in the loop. Roots Tech. Connected.
Hell yeah.
Another really major topic of conversation with staying connected to your roots and your heritage remains the topic of redress. So
let's get into it.
It's been a topic that we've kind of saved for this episode because there's been a lot of other heavy topics in this series, and redress is it's definitely a heated conversation. It's on the lines of things that invokes a lot of anger, but it's also a good example of the way that we've turned our anger into proactiveness.
Yes.
So I'll give like a little bit of a breakdown of where we currently are with redress in the Japanese Canadian community for what happened to us during the war, the dispossession of our people, and for
how we were treated
after when we had lost more than just our homes. So one of the very first cases actually towards redress happened in 1947, which is actually, it's the least talked about case, I think, when we're talking about Japanese Canadian redress. It's the Nakashima versus Canada case from 1947. So it was basically a case that was brought up because we were acknowledging and requesting that the Canadian government acknowledge that their promise to protect stolen property had been broken during the war, or that the items that were sold off or auctioned off were auctioned off at little value without any of our consent or consultation. So a lot of our belongings were sold off at, less than valuable. Right. So actually, one of the documents from episode 2 that Sakura was doing a show and tell with are from that case, which is really interesting to know about.
Yeah.
the legal argument pretty much at the time was that the government, the Canadian government, was evasive and deferred to wartime decisions and old conceptions of crown liability in regards to how the Japanese Canadian stolen possessions were treated during the war. Collected many cases of complaints sent in from various Japanese Canadians who had reported unfair disposal of property. So both the Yoshidas and the Mikis were part of that. Something that I think is appropriate to bring up with regards to this, you can actually find the record for this. I'll try and link it down below on our YouTube channel. So if you're listening to us on just our podcast, make sure that you head over and at least look through the links in the description. You can see if your family is on there. But something to know too is when you're looking for your family's stuff like that, like I know that my family had things taken from them, like the fishing boat that my OG son had and our family sword was taken and auctioned off, and my dad actually managed to track it down, I have no idea how, many years ago to a thrift store that is now closed down in Vancouver. So it had made its way back to Vancouver from wherever it had been previously. But as of right now, all of those things, that information is lost because of the failure of the Office of the Custodian of Enemy Property to document all of their actions and all of the steps that they had taken during the war. So don't be concerned if you don't see your family on there. It doesn't mean that they necessarily didn't participate. It just means that some things are lost in translation, etc. Continuing, there's the more well-known redress campaign that occurred between 1984 and 1988, which was led by the then president of the NAJC, Art Miki. We've got a Miki leading the parade here.
We've got a Miki up in the house.
Yes,
here we go.
Mikis. Which actually fought for a lump sum that were paid to living Japanese Canadians at the time in symbolic redress. In 1988, an agreement was signed to have all of that paid out to the living Japanese Canadians who were affected by the war times.
Right.
And it was also an acknowledgement that was signed by the government representatives to just acknowledge what had happened and that it was wrong, which is a great achievement in and of itself, even though it took 4 years for them to get that. The Canadian Race Relations Foundation was actually founded sometime after that, about 10 years after that, in 1992, which actually combats a lot of race issues in various Canadian communities. So that was something else that came out of that redress campaign, and that redress campaign led to the redress, or the attempt at redress, in a lot of other communities in Canada that have been wronged by the government, such as Indigenous folks and Jewish and Italian communities as well. No idea on how those redress campaigns went, but we're not here to talk about those today. Today, where we stand with redress is our girl, Loreen Oikawa, the current president of the National Association of Japanese Canadians, actually recently wrote a 36-page report on suggestions for redressing historical wrongs against the Japanese Canadian community, and she submitted that off to the government in 2019. That's kind of the last piece of news that I have on that particular piece of redress. But it's a good, it's good to know that it's not over, right?
That
redress is
still
something that is ongoing.
Yes.
It will be ongoing for a long time. There are lots of things that have yet to be dealt with. And for anyone who has questions about why redress is still necessary, a very simple answer is that we're human beings, and we were treated like animals.
Yeah.
And pretty much all we got was a check in the mail.
Yeah, and a little TV apology.
And obviously we're not the only community that's been wronged in that way, if not in slightly other communities have been wronged in even more horrific ways.
In even more horrific ways.
With even less redress. So
Exactly.
the fact that we're requesting further redress for our community has just as much to do with finding peace for our community as it does for setting a premise for other communities to step forward and do the same.
Yeah.
And to support the communities that have already come forward and requested that.
Definitely. Yeah. This is something that I would always bring up with my father, and he would always kind of like hush me. Like, they apologize, like, what's done is done. And I was always like, that, I don't know how you feel, but when I look at it and how I feel about it, I don't feel like it's done. Like, I don't feel like anything was done to make up for the fact.
Yeah, I think when I started to learn a bit about the redress, I kind of like in my head at the time, I thought about it in a way that was very like, oh, well, yeah, I guess it's, yeah, like I guess they got, you know,
I guess they said
$21,000 like in a check form. Yes, that's a lot of money. I guess so. But I think why it's important to continue on with requesting redress is that it's kind of like it's kind of like kicking your kid in the face and handing him a $20 bill.
100%.
And then later in therapy, when that kid is talking about that one time when their dad kicked them in the face, their therapist looks at them and goes, "That's not cool."
But they gave me
a $20 bill.
Yeah, they gave me a gift afterwards to make up for it.
Yeah, they gave me money. They bought me after they kicked me in the face.
Yes.
So therefore it's fine. And it's obviously not, right? So put into that context, it's a matter of trauma. And obviously there are obvious examples of how that trauma has been passed down to varying generations of Japanese Canadians. And, you know, us specifically, like we've talked already during this this series, we've talked about how information has been lost over time because of a lack of willingness to discuss our history and our stories, because we've pretty much been told by the government that our stories don't matter, and so, but that we could have some money instead. As long as we don't talk about our stories and don't share our stories and assimilate as best as possible. So all of these, by the way, are just our opinions, but that's what you came here for, right? So,
oh my God.
Just our opinions. But it's about the trauma that's been passed on to us. We've been denied as further generations of Japanese Canadians the ability to speak our language. We've been denied the ability to read our stories in the language that it was meant to be read in.
Yes.
We've been denied our names, which is another huge point that we're definitely going to talk about real soon. It's a bunch of papers that you can kind of read about what has happened to the Japanese Canadian communities and other Asian communities, is that I forgot where I was gonna go with this. Oh shit. I don't know. I lost my train of thought. Oh no. With redress and stuff that's happened to the Asian communities and our community in papers that you can read.
Oh my God.
I'm trying to backtrack my train of thought. Anyway, nothing gets done out of silence, right?
Yeah.
Nothing comes from silence.
And we've been very silent for a very long time.
I remember where my train of thought was going.
Gorgeous.
There we go. Yeah, it's a matter of the fact that our communities have lost more than just a home in the way that we were treated back then. A lot of us didn't come from money when we immigrated to this country. We were denied the ability to be successful and somehow overcame that and became a very successful and thriving community, contributing lots to the Canadian economy. Yes. And still were told pretty much to get out and that we weren't welcome, that we weren't human. We were called aliens. And the possessions, the very little possessions that we had been able to either afford at the time or had brought with us at the time, were wrongfully sold off and treated like a rusty spoon.
Yeah.
So that's why redress is still necessary, because I'm fourth generation removed from this trauma, and it still has affected me. It's still affected the way that I was brought up. It's affected my sense of self and my sense of just identity.
Yeah.
And that's why redress is still necessary, because we're 4 generations in, we're 5 generations in now, and we're still experiencing the after effects of what had happened to our country, or to our community in this country. You know, we received a check from the government, sure, but we were not encouraged to come forward and tell our stories. We were not encouraged to, we were not given any actual, like, fully written out statement detailing out what was done to us. And even in the documentation that currently exists in the government archive, a lot of it is restricted. So we are once again being denied information about our community. And specifically our families in a lot of cases, which is holding us back from being able to move forward. So part of the redress is getting a full acknowledgement of the historical wrongs that have been inflicted upon us.
Definitely.
So I apologize. That was that's as much as we'll get into internment and redress today. But yeah, redress is it's an ongoing battle.
It's an ongoing battle,
and it's one of the most important efforts that our community is taking towards healing and staying connected to our heritage and our roots. It's a really important part of our history.
Totally.
And then Sakura mentioned preserving the Japanese name.
Yes. So I, a few years back, was given the opportunity to change my legal name. And my parents and I were discussing a whole bunch of like Caucasian names that I would potentially choose to be my new legal name. And I just had to kind of like stop myself for a second and be like, whoa. Why am I going through Caucasian names trying to find a Caucasian name for myself? That does not make sense at all. So I immediately started looking into Japanese names that I was super connected to and wanted to have as my first name, as my previous Japanese name no longer applies to me. So it was so important for me to have a Japanese first name. I think as a way for myself to kind of battle the ongoing erasure of Japanese names and like the Japanese language in colonized countries. I grew up knowing my grandmother only by her Caucasian name. I did not know her Japanese name at all. I did not refer to her by her Japanese name. I only knew her by her Caucasian name. And then after she passed, then finding out that that wasn't even actually her name, that was a name that she had to adopt because white people just refused to learn how to pronounce her name. That just resonated with me so deeply. I don't need to adopt a name from your culture in order for me to exist in your culture when said culture is a melting pot of a bunch of cultures.
Yeah.
Canada is a melting pot of all cultures all over the world. I don't have to choose a white colonizer name to be able to fit in and to be able to function in this society.
Yeah.
So I was like, absolutely not. I am choosing a Japanese name, and that's final.
Yeah, that's that.
And that's that.
Yeah, I think too, like that's super applicable to, there's the really colonial idea and prejudice against ethnic names.
Mm-hmm.
So, our people, if your name was like Sakura Yoshida on your resume, maybe even like a couple years ago, but I'm sure that this is still a thing now at various places of work, you're less likely to get an interview than if you have a Caucasian name.
Yeah, because they automatically assume that you speak English either as a second language, like broken English, or you don't really speak English at all.
That you're not really smart.
Which, when you have an Asian accent, white people immediately think that you're not smart.
Yeah, which is a whole other conversation that we know that you guys didn't necessarily sign up for. So we'll do an episode probably next season on that's going to be probably pretty intense on just interment in our history and stuff like that in general. But yeah, I was really lucky to be given, I've already mentioned, sorry for a lot of the repetition in this series. I was really lucky to be given both the surname Sugimoto and also like a Japanese name, Kyoko, on top of my Caucasian name. It's benefited me greatly. Like, having a Japanese name has benefited me greatly.
I think it's so important.
Especially like with my reintroduction into the community over the last couple years. It's really, really benefited me.
Definitely. And your younger sister has a legal Japanese first name.
Yeah, that was really touching, actually. It was really important to my stepmother that she have a Japanese name.
I love that.
She has an English first name, like the rest of us, and she has a Japanese middle name and the Sugimoto last name as well. Yeah. We often combine her Caucasian and her Japanese name because her name's Maya and her middle name is Rei. That's her Japanese name, R-E-I. So we call her Maya Rei all the time.
Right.
Or Maya Ray of Sunshine or something like that. Yeah. But it's nice. It's nice that it can be even constituted in like the same sentence, and that it's like a constant reminder for who she is, and it'll always be a reminder for her. Yeah. She actually, oh my God, did I tell you the last time I was over there, she introduced herself to a kid at the park, and like the kid was like, "Hi, my name is blah, blah, blah." And she was like, "Hi, my name is Maya Sugimoto," and like did her whole name. Yeah. And I like wanted to cry. It was so cute.
That's so cute.
So cute, like your whole name.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first time I heard her say Sugimoto, I like got really emotional. Yeah. Because it's like a long one. It's a long name to say. But she's 3 years old and she can say it. So if a 3-year-old can say Sugimoto,
why can't an adult?
You should be able to as well.
It's wild.
But yeah, we were talking about like how like what type of names we'll like give our kids. And I said that it would be nice for me, at least in my perspective, to give my kid a Japanese first name that could also have like a Caucasian like nickname because they'll probably be mixed as well. Yes. But that's fine. But yeah, I still want them to have like a connection to their Japanese name besides just the surname. So my Oba-san's mother, so my great-great-grandmother, her name was Tomiko. And I love that name because a nickname would be Tommy. Even for like a girl.
Hell yeah.
Like Tomiko. So I that's like or Mariko, because nickname Mary. Yeah. So those are some options on the plate. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm very happy that your sister got that connection. The newest members into our Japanese family are my 2 nieces, my sister's daughters. My sister's husband is Caucasian and she took his last name, so she no longer has her Japanese last name. And unfortunately, she has not passed down any Japanese name to either one of the girls. I don't know if maybe they have like Japanese nicknames, but they don't have like a legal Japanese name. So I'm going to be very interested to see what it's like to grow up as a person of color and as a Japanese person with a Caucasian first name, middle name, and last name. I'm going to be, it's going to be very interesting. And that's something that kind of like, I wouldn't say triggers me, but it's something that's a bit of a hot topic for me, is the erasure of Japanese names, because it's what the colonizers wanted. Is to not have any Japanese people, or if you are Japanese, you need to be as white as possible. You need to be the closest thing to a white person with no trace of Japanese. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. They may not, if they don't have any Japanese culture in their lives growing up, they might not even like notice it. But I just think it's going to be sad if at one point we get to a place where you're looking at a school list and you see that there's some kids who are of different cultures, but as you're reading the school list, there are no names from other cultures. It's just all Caucasian first names and Caucasian last names. I don't think that's good for like diversity and for sociology, and like I don't think that's good personally. So
no, I agree.
I definitely have issues with the newest members of our family not having our last name and not having a Japanese name in general. Obviously, that's just like my own personal issue. So like you were saying, when I have children, if I'm lucky enough to have children, they 100% will have Japanese first names and last names. If my partner randomly happens to be a white person, they're not having the Caucasian last name. If they are from like a different culture and it's really important for them to have a name from their culture, I 100% respect that, but there has to be a Japanese name somewhere in there. If not the last name, the first name, like somewhere. It just has to be.
Or
that.
like two kids and one gets one last name and one gets the other.
Because I want to honor other people's culture as well.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, if I married a, millionth generation Canadian, it's definitely more important for me to hold on to like my culture than to have my kid's last name be Smith.
Yeah, none of that hyphenated shit though. I mean, if you like it, then that's fine. But I
my
would
gosh.
Never. Anyway, so yes, preserving the Japanese name. And then finally we have learning our language, which is perfect because we are filming at the Vancouver Japanese Language School / Japanese Hall.
Yeah.
So very accessible. We've already talked a lot about how neither of us know our language or like at all. We can't like read it or listen to it very comfortably. We're kind of in the beginning stages of learning
how to read.
How to read. We are very lucky. We have a couple listeners out there who have been very helpful and have given us a lot of sources to use.
Yes.
One of whom has actually made us an entire
spreadsheet,
breakdown
Google Doc,
with a bunch of really helpful sources that we're definitely going to be making use of. But who knows, maybe we'll take some lessons at VJLS. Even if they're online.
I think if I had my language as a child, my imposter syndrome probably would have been almost nothing.
Yeah.
Like if I was able to, because as a mixed race person in Canada, Japanese mixed race, you 100% know that when you meet someone who's from Japan, one of the first things they will ask you when they find out that you're Japanese is, do you speak Japanese? It is a very important thing to the Japanese community that you know how to speak Japanese, and the shame that just showers over your body when someone from Japan asks you if you can speak Japanese and you can't. Yeah. That shame is so strong and definitely fed into the not feeling like you're enough.
Yeah, even like my my like elder family member that I've been in touch with in Japan has been like, so when are you gonna learn Japanese? Like he hasn't been like shameful about it. Like he's like the sweetest little man like ever. I've bless him.
Yeah.
But yeah, even he's like brought stuff like that up with
You're
me.
Japanese.
I've been like, yeah,
Why?
like I've always wanted that. He thought it was interesting that I was given the Sugimoto family name, not because I don't deserve it or anything like that, but because that's not how families work in Japan. You wouldn't. I don't remember exactly what the specifics are, but anyway, he thought that it was interesting that I like managed to inherit the Sugimoto name.
Yes.
But he was very happy about it. But yeah, learning the language I think would be great, because we've been dealing with imposter syndrome here in Canada. But when we moved to Japan, with everyone asking us stuff like that, oh, that's weird, you have a Japanese name. But they'll probably tell us that in Japanese, and we'll be like, sumimasen, Deskete.
Oh my God. I think another good thing to bring up is why we don't speak Japanese here in Canada when you're third, fourth, fifth generation Japanese Canadian. Unfortunately, here in Canada, or in North America in general, if you are Asian and you speak English with an Asian accent, you are automatically viewed as being unintelligent. What you're saying is automatically taken as like, I don't really believe you because you're not speaking English properly. And I think our ancestors really saw how they were treated in the community and were like, okay, we do not want this for our children. We do not want this for our next generation. How are we supposed to, ascend here and move up here if we're always going to be treated a certain way because of the way that we talk? So I feel like that's like a very strong point into why lots of people who are third, fourth, fifth generation Japanese Canadian do not speak Japanese. Yeah. And it's almost kind of like, I wouldn't say insulting when someone is kind of like, oh, well, like, you should be able to speak Japanese, or why don't you speak Japanese? It's like, do you not know the history of anti-Japanese racism in North America?
The answer is no, because our community is historically quite silent on it, besides the couple attempts at redress, which is, again, another reason why redress is super important for the future of our community. But yeah, there's a lot to do. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work that has been done. Staying connected to your roots is a really important way to preserve the culture, to preserve the community, and help it grow and prosper.
Definitely.
There are now, as of like a 2016 census in Canada, over 100,000 of us with Japanese descent or Japanese ancestry, which is a lot. For this country, considering that we've been in this country for a little over 100 years. Resilience definitely lives on in all of us. Once again, through symbols of our community, like VJLS, like the Nikkei Center in Burnaby. And in all of us, in all of the events that we do, in all of the markets that we attend, in every effort that we take towards helping to keep our culture alive, even especially during this pandemic. All of the virtual efforts that have been made by this community to keep those events going are just another testament to how important keeping in touch with your roots is to us as people. And we really, really hope on that note that the series has contributed in some way to helping anyone out there either find it in them to go out there and research your family, or to has sparked at least some interest in your roots, or has informed you in any way. This is kind of our first Hafuit contribution to the Japanese Canadian community in helping to preserve our heritage in this country. We've been so blessed to be able to participate in the ExplorASIAN Festival, especially for a podcast that is very new, 5 months new at the time of this release, and to be asked to participate in any way and to be involved with the Japanese language school is just beyond words. So we really, really hope that someone got something out of this series. And once again, thank you so much for making it through all 4 episodes. And this will be the 23rd episode of season 1 for the Hafu. 23 episodes.
23 episodes? Really?
High five.
Yes.
My hand is a little bit slimy, sorry.
Oh my God.
It's very hot in here. Yeah, it's been quite a ride. We really can't wait to put out more information and more episodes, and perhaps even contribute more to our YouTube channel, put a little bit more effort
into that.
And we really, really hope that all of you will follow us and help us contribute to further events.
Definitely.
Check out all the other artists that are participating in the ExplorASIAN Festival.
Yes.
It's not over yet. There are a lot of really, really incredible artists. You can find the link to the program down in our description box on our YouTube channel for this episode. And we really wish you all the best.
Yeah. You
can follow us specifically on Instagram only at Hafuit. And we are on YouTube for those of you who are listening just through the podcast on YouTube at the Hafuit Podcast. I am on Instagram as well as Twitter at This Is Kyoko.
And I am on just Instagram as saku.miki.
And if you want to follow the Vancouver Japanese Language School, and you definitely should, because they have lots of different, especially if you've got children, they are on Instagram at VJLS-JH, and the ExplorASIAN Festival is at ExplorASIAN Festival. Very simple, very easy to remember. Again, all of these links to all of our socials, to everyone that we've talked about in this podcast, and extra information even possibly will be down in the description box for this episode on YouTube. It's been a really incredible season. We've had a really good time, way better of a time than we thought that we were going to.
Yes.
And we were really looking forward to talking to you guys again in a couple months.
Yeah.
Stay in touch with your Hafus.
Yes.
We'll talk to you in a couple months. Goodbye.
Bye.